I've always had a fascination with urban legends, the kind of stories whispered around campfires or shared in hushed tones late at night. Maybe it's the thrill of venturing into the unknown or the allure of testing the boundaries of fear. But I've always sought out places shrouded in mystery. And that's how I found myself, standing at the edge of the old Xiang Temple, a crumbling relic hidden deep within the dense forests of a rural Chinese province. The temple had been abandoned for decades, its origins a blend of history and legend. Locals called it cursed, the home of a disgraced monk who was expelled from his order for practicing forbidden rituals. The stories say that in his final moments, he uttered a curse so powerful that even the bravest of monks refused to step foot inside the temple again. Over time, nature consumed the place, vines creeping over walls, the roof caving in, but the curse supposedly remained. We had heard these tales from a local guide the day before, and naturally, my friends and I couldn't resist. There were 4 of us: Alex, the fearless leader with a penchant for ghost stories; Mia, our skeptic who always managed to find a logical explanation; Jason, who hated scary stuff but never wanted to be left out; and me, the one who always carried a flashlight and a camera, just in case. When we arrived at the temple, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the uneven stone path leading up to its gates. The air felt different here, heavier, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The gate creaked as we pushed it open, revealing the darkened courtyard beyond. Broken statues of ancient monks lined the path, their faces worn smooth by time, their empty eyes watching us. "I bet it's just rats," Mia muttered, stepping carefully over a cracked tile. But as we moved closer to the temple's entrance, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't the cold. It was something else, something I couldn't name. I glanced at my friends, and by their uneasy expressions, I knew they felt it too. Standing before the massive wooden doors, I hesitated. "Are we really doing this?" I asked, half joking but fully aware that the answer was already decided. Alex smirked, gripping the rusted handle. We didn't come all this way to chicken out now. The door groaned as it swung open, revealing a yawning darkness beyond. My flashlight flickered as I stepped inside, and the last sliver of sunlight vanished as the door creaked shut behind us. And that's when I realized it wasn't just the stories that had kept people away. Something was very, very wrong here. The first thing I noticed inside the temple was the smell, a mix of damp wood, mildew, and something metallic that hung faintly in the air. My flashlight cast a weak, narrow beam, barely piercing the oppressive darkness. The walls, once vibrant with intricate murals, were now cracked and faded, their images warped by time. Shadows seemed to shift as we moved, dancing just beyond the edge of the light. Alex led the way, his phone in hand, snapping pictures like a tourist. "This place is ancient," he whispered, his voice echoing eerily in the cavernous hall. Jason stayed close behind him, his shoulders tense, glancing nervously at every corner. "Can we just look around and leave? This place gives me the creeps." Mia laughed softly, trying to lighten the mood. "It's just an old building, Jason. Don't let your imagination get the better of you." But I could feel it too, something unseen pressing against us, a presence that seemed to observe our every move. My hand trembled slightly as I adjusted my grip on the flashlight. We ventured deeper, passing through a long corridor lined with ancient statues of monks in prayer. Most were broken, their faces chipped away or their hands missing. At the end of the hallway stood a larger statue, more intact than the others. Its face was hauntingly serene, but its eyes, deep, empty hollows, seemed to follow us as we approached. "That's creepy," Jason muttered, his voice barely audible. Alex chuckled nervously. "Just a statue. Nothing to worry about." As we turned a corner, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew colder, and a faint sound reached my ears, a low, rhythmic chanting, barely perceptible. I stopped in my tracks, holding my breath to listen. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice a hushed whisper. Mia shook her head, but Alex frowned, tilting his head. "It's probably the wind," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. We pressed on, and the sound grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't the wind. It was chanting, a deep, guttural tone that resonated in my chest. Jason froze. "Okay, no. This is not normal. We need to leave." "Calm down," Alex said, though his voice wavered. "It's probably an echo or something." But as we stood there, the chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. It was as if the temple itself was holding its breath. Then, the door behind us slammed shut with a force that shook the ground. We spun around, panic rising in our throats. "What the hell was that?" Mia gasped, her earlier confidence replaced with fear. "I didn't touch anything," Jason stammered, his eyes wide. Alex approached the door and tried to push it open, but it wouldn't budge. "It's stuck," he said, his voice strained. "That's not possible," Mia whispered. And then, from the darkness behind us, came the sound of footsteps. Not ours. Slow, deliberate, and growing closer. The footsteps echoed louder, each one deliberate and heavy, cutting through the oppressive silence of the temple. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. "Who's there?" Alex called out, his voice shaking despite his attempt to sound authoritative. No response. The beam of my flashlight trembled as I turned it toward the direction of the sound. The shadows seemed to recoil, twisting and stretching unnaturally. At first, there was nothing, just the cracked stone walls and the remnants of tattered banners hanging limply from the ceiling. Then a figure emerged. It was barely visible at first, blending with the dark like it belonged to it. But as it stepped closer, the faint glow of our flashlights illuminated its features, or rather, the lack of them. The figure was cloaked in a tattered robe, its face obscured by a deep hood. The fabric swayed, as if carried by a wind we couldn't feel. "Oh my God," Mia whispered, clutching Jason's arm. "Back away," Alex said, though he himself didn't move. The figure stopped just a few feet away, utterly still. Its presence was suffocating, like the air had thickened around us. And then it raised its head. From beneath the hood, two glowing eyes pierced through the darkness, cold, pale blue, and radiating an unnatural light. They locked onto us, sending a chill down my spine. "Is this some kind of prank?" Jason tried to laugh, but his voice cracked. "It has to be, right?" The figure tilted its head, almost curiously, and then it began to hum, a low, resonant sound that made the walls vibrate. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and I could see my breath fogging in the air. "That's it," Alex muttered, grabbing Mia's arm. "We're leaving." But as we turned toward the door, it became clear that leaving wasn't an option. The statues lining the corridor had shifted. Once kneeling in prayer, their heads were now turned toward us, their hollow eyes fixed with an eerie intensity. "Did they move?" Jason stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Before anyone could answer, the figure in the robe let out a guttural growl, a sound so unnatural it made my skin crawl. It raised an arm, bony and pale, pointing directly at us. And then, without warning, the torches lining the walls burst into flame, casting the room in an orange glow that only made the figure look more menacing. "Run!" Alex shouted, snapping us out of our frozen terror. We bolted down the corridor, the light from the flames casting wild, flickering shadows that seemed to chase us. The chanting resumed, louder this time, as if coming from every direction at once. My lungs burned. My legs ached. But I didn't dare stop. I could feel it behind us, the figure, its footsteps impossibly loud, like it was right on our heels. We stumbled into a vast chamber, the largest yet. At its center was an altar, adorned with crumbling relics and dark stains that could only be blood. The chanting grew deafening, and the walls seemed to close in around us. "We're trapped," Mia said, her voice breaking as she clung to Alex. Jason pointed to another doorway on the far side of the room. "There, go." But before we could move, the robed figure appeared again, as if it had materialized out of the shadows. This time, its hood had fallen back, revealing a face twisted and decayed, with hollow cheeks and a mouth that stretched into an unnatural, jagged grin. It opened its mouth, and a guttural, rasping voice filled the room. "You should not have come." We stood frozen in the vast chamber, our eyes locked on the robed figure. Its words echoed around us, reverberating off the ancient walls as if the temple itself were speaking. "You should not have come." The guttural voice sent shivers down my spine, each syllable soaked in malice. My legs felt rooted to the spot, trembling under the weight of fear. The figure began to move forward, its jagged grin widening unnaturally. Jason snapped us out of our paralysis. "Move," he screamed, grabbing Mia and pushing her toward the door on the far side of the room. We bolted again, sprinting toward the only escape we could see. The robed figure let out a guttural roar, its sound inhuman and filled with rage. The torches lining the walls flared brighter, casting the chamber in an otherworldly orange light. As we reached the doorway, the ground beneath us began to shake violently. Stone fragments rained down from the ceiling, and cracks spread like veins along the floor. The doorway loomed ahead, but the air around it shimmered as if it were alive. Alex hesitated. "Wait, what if?" But before he could finish, the robed figure appeared again, blocking the exit. It didn't walk or run. It simply materialized, its twisted face now mere feet away. Mia let out a blood-curdling scream. The figure raised its hand, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost formed on the walls, and our breath hung in the air like smoke. I felt a force grip me, unseen but undeniable. My limbs were locked in place, and I could only watch as the figure's glowing eyes bore into me. It spoke again, its voice layered with an unnatural resonance. "You have trespassed on sacred ground. Now you will pay the price." The walls began to pulse, the ancient carvings glowing with a dim red light. Shadows stretched and writhed, forming shapes that resembled grasping hands and contorted faces. Jason lunged forward, swinging the flashlight he held like a weapon. "Get away from us," he yelled. The figure didn't flinch. With a flick of its bony hand, Jason was thrown backward, crashing into the altar. He groaned in pain but managed to scramble to his feet. "Run! Keep going!" he shouted. Alex and Mia dragged me forward, and we darted toward another corridor that branched off from the chamber. The walls closed in, the space narrowing until we were practically squeezing through. The sound of chanting grew louder, echoing all around us. "Where are we even going?" Mia cried, her voice cracking. "I don't know." Alex snapped. "Just keep moving." We stumbled into another room, smaller but no less eerie. It was lined with statues of monks, their faces obscured by hoods, eerily similar to the figure that was pursuing us. Their hands were clasped in prayer, but their expressions were twisted, as if in agony. A low growl echoed from behind us, and we knew the figure wasn't far. "This way." Alex pointed to a spiral staircase that descended into darkness. It was narrow and steep, the kind of staircase that seemed designed to make escape as difficult as possible. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice trembling. "No, but we don't have a choice." We began our descent. the sound of the figure's growls growing fainter but never disappearing. The air grew colder with each step, and the darkness became oppressive. Our flashlights flickered, their beams barely cutting through the gloom. As we reached the bottom, we found ourselves in a cavernous space. The air was thick and heavy, carrying a metallic tang that made me gag. In the center of the room stood a massive stone pedestal, and atop it a large, ancient tome bound in cracked leather. "What is this place?" Mia whispered, her voice barely audible. Before anyone could answer, the chanting resumed, this time louder and clearer. It wasn't coming from any one direction. It was everywhere. And then the shadows began to move again. The shadows in the cavern writhed and coiled like living entities, their movements synchronized with the haunting chants that reverberated all around us. The massive tome on the pedestal seemed to pulsate, its leathery surface flexing like it was alive. "Don't touch it," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the growing hum. But Alex, ever the skeptic, stepped forward, his flashlight beam fixed on the ancient book. "This might be the key," he said, his voice trembling despite his attempt at bravado. "No," Jason barked, grabbing Alex's arm. "We don't know what it'll do." Before the argument could escalate, a deafening roar erupted from the darkness. The robed figure materialized at the far end of the cavern, its form now even more grotesque. Its skeletal face twisted into a snarl, and its hands, sharp and clawed, reached toward us as if grasping at the air. "We need to get out of here," Mia screamed, her voice raw with panic. Jason pulled Alex away from the pedestal, and we bolted toward the staircase. But the shadows on the walls weren't just shadows anymore. They lunged at us, tangible and cold, like icy tendrils trying to ensnare us. "Go, go, go," Jason yelled, swiping at the darkness with his flashlight. We scrambled up the spiral staircase, our footsteps echoing against the stone walls. The temperature plummeted even further, and frost began forming on the steps, making our ascent treacherous. I slipped, my hands scraping against the rough stone, but Alex hauled me to my feet. The chanting grew louder, more frantic, and I felt a pressure in my chest, as though the air itself were trying to crush me. "We're almost there," Mia shouted, her voice tinged with desperation. But as we reached the top of the staircase, the doorway to the chamber we'd fled earlier was gone. In its place was a solid wall of stone, as if the temple itself had shifted to trap us. "No, no, no." Alex pounded on the wall, his fists bloodying against the unyielding surface. The robed figure appeared again, emerging from the shadows like a predator savoring its prey. Its skeletal grin was wider now, impossibly so, and its hollow eyes burned with an unnatural light. "This is your fate," it rasped, each word dripping with malice. Jason turned to us, his face pale but resolute. "Stay behind me," he said, raising his flashlight as if it were a weapon. The figure lunged, moving faster than anything human. Jason swung the flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness, and for a moment, the figure recoiled, hissing like an animal burned by fire. "Run!" Jason yelled. We turned and sprinted back down the staircase, our legs burning with exertion. The cavern below seemed to shift as we entered it again, its walls contracting and expanding like a living organism. The pedestal was gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of shadow and light in the center of the room. "Is that?" Mia began, but her words were cut off by the figure's guttural roar. "It's our only chance," I shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the vortex. The chanting reached a fever pitch, the words incomprehensible but filled with an ancient power. The robed figure descended the staircase behind us, its clawed hands outstretched. One by one, we leapt into the vortex, the sensation like plunging into icy water. The world around us twisted and blurred, and for a moment, I thought we were being torn apart. Then, everything went silent. We found ourselves sprawled on the forest floor, the temple nowhere in sight. The air was warm, and the night was eerily calm, as if nothing had happened. "Is it over?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. But before anyone could answer, a faint whisper reached my ears, a voice so familiar, so chilling, that it froze the blood in my veins. "You should not have left.